Stories were Tucker Reed's whole life. She was born into a family of best-selling authors, landed a six-figure book deal as a teenager, and even starred in a horror movie. On paper, it looked like the perfect setup for a literary success story, except for one tiny issue. Somewhere between publishing and performing, Tucker found herself tangled in a legal battle, accused of something a little more serious than bad writing. Her family had money problems. Her uncle had opinions about those money problems. And let's just say that their last conversation didn't end in a handshake. By the time the cameras were rolling on her indie horror film, Tucker had already lived through a scene far more dramatic than anything on the script. And the people who worked with her, they had no idea. This is the story of how a rising young author went from writing fiction to starring in a real-life courtroom drama. And if you think this is about self-defense, hold that thought. But before we dive in, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you're in the right place. Hit follow now for at least 2 new episodes every week. This is 10 Minute Murder. Let's get into it. Tucker Reed didn't just grow up around stories. She was one. The eldest daughter of New York Times bestselling authors Daniel Reed and Kelly Moore, she was practically written into existence. Her parents had barely finished basking in the success of their book when she arrived, as if she were the sequel they didn't know they were writing. From the start, storytelling was in her DNA. She was raised on family lore that traced their roots all the way back to the Mayflower, a lineage that, if nothing else, gave her plenty of material. By high school, she wasn't just consuming stories, she was writing them, getting her work published in the school paper, and slowly building a reputation for crafting compelling narratives. And then, at just 19, Tucker pulled off something most aspiring writers only dream of. Alongside her mother, Kelly, and her younger sister, Larkin, she co-authored a book called Amber House. The details of the publishing deal are murky, but rumor has it the rights sold for 6-figure sum. What mattered more than the money, though, was what it symbolized. These women were on the verge of literary success. Amber House was the first in a planned trilogy, arriving at the same time when pop culture was obsessed with paranormal romance. Twilight was dominating bookshelves and movie screens, and Bella Swan had become the poster child for love-struck teen angst. Some readers swooned over her tortured relationships with a vampire and a werewolf. Others saw her as, well, a bit of a doormat. That's where Amber House offered something different. Its main character, Sarah Parsons, wasn't waiting around for a brooding love interest to dictate her fate. Readers called her strong, independent, an admirable heroine who chose her own path rather than letting it be chosen for her. It was a shift from the era's typical young adult romance, and in some ways, a reflection of the woman who helped write her. Sarah Parsons, the protagonist of Amber House, stood apart from the wave of passive heroines dominating young adult fiction at the time. That same drive to take action showed up in Tucker Reed's own life. After high school, she moved on to college, though she wouldn't end up finishing her degree. What she did find was something that felt even more important: advocacy. She began working with other students, particularly survivors of sexual assault, helping them file complaints with their schools and law enforcement. Her work didn't go unnoticed. She was given the Lucy Burns Challenger Award from the Veterans Feminists of America, a recognition of her dedication to helping survivors navigate a system that often worked against them. But standing up for others came with consequences. While Tucker had success guiding others through the process of reporting assault, her own case didn't go the same way. She had filed a report with the LAPD against an ex-boyfriend, accusing him of sexual abuse, but the case was dismissed for lack of evidence. That didn't stop her from speaking out. In a blog post, she named her ex, shared a photo of him, and detailed what she said he had done to her. That decision landed her in legal trouble. He filed a libel suit against her. A friend later told the press, "I think she had to take down the original blog post, and she wasn't allowed to mention him by name anywhere." They settled it out of court, and then she moved back to the area." End quote. It was a loss, but it didn't stop her. Tucker returned home and kept moving forward. She found work as a journalist and even landed a lead role in an independent horror movie called From the Dark, which was released in 2020. She could easily pull out an emotion, said the movie's lead composer and production manager. Everyone on set was impressed with her ability to bring a complex mix of emotions to her role, especially during a pivotal moment where her character shoots someone on screen. Looking back, her co-star and the film's executive producer, Matthew Spickert, found it unsettling. Quote, "When I watch the movie now, I feel like someone's messing with me. It's like a sick joke in a way that I don't get." That's because at the time, no one on set knew the truth. Tucker Reed wasn't just an actress playing a character who pulled the trigger. She was out on bond for fatally shooting her own uncle. Tucker Reed's home life was full-blown psychological and emotional warfare. Her parents, Kelly and David, spent years locked in a volatile marriage that finally imploded in 2000. The divorce wasn't clean, and neither was the financial fallout. While they battled over money, their children were left to decide which side to take. Tucker and her siblings chose their mother, Kelly, who packed them up and moved them to Oregon to be near her own parents. It wasn't a family reunion, it was a financial move. Kelly's parents owned a $1 million ranch, not only gave them a place to live, but also provided a source of income. Despite being a published author with best-selling books, Kelly's financial situation was bleak. Instead of getting a job, she opted to remain a stay-at-home mother. Her parents supported this choice, even buying her a home in Ashland. But when the money ran out, they started taking out loans against their own property just to keep Kelly afloat. And that's where the trouble started. Every loan chipped away at the inheritance Kelly was set to receive, and she wasn't the only one expecting a payout. That money was supposed to be split equally with her brother, Shane Moore. Shane Moore had his own complicated history. Once struggling with addiction, he had turned his life around after their father got sick. He moved back home, cared for his parents, and eventually settled into his own cabin on the property. But he had one major issue. His sister was draining the value of the land that was supposed to be both of theirs. Shane was furious. He wanted Kelly to stop taking out loans and to get a job, and their arguments became frequent and explosive. One altercation ended with Shane allegedly throwing an oil can at Tucker, hitting her in the face. She got a restraining order against him, making family meetings even more complicated. But Shane wasn't backing down. On July 26, 2016, he learned that Kelly planned to sell the ranch. He wasn't about to let that happen. He came up with his own plan. He would have their mother sign the property over to him and Kelly immediately. That way, if she wanted to keep borrowing money against it, she could only touch her share, not the entire estate. To make it official, he called a notary public to the property. But he wasn't taking any chances. He also called the sheriff's department, saying he was concerned about how things might go that day. He asked for a deputy to be present, just in case. Kelly's realtor got there first. Another heated argument broke out between Kelly and Shane. According to Kelly, Shane told her not to F up my deal and threatened to kill both her and Tucker. The realtor backed up those claims. Sensing that things were spiraling, the realtor left just as the notary arrived. That's when everything turned deadly. Kelly and Tucker went inside with the notary to go over the paperwork. Shane approached the house. Tucker later told investigators, "I was absolutely sure he was going to kill my mother." So she grabbed a gun. She fired one shot. Shane Moore was hit in the chest. He died at the scene. Tucker was arrested for manslaughter just hours later. But at first, it seemed like she might be able to argue self-defense. She bonded out, and for a while, it looked like the case would quietly fade away. Then the notary came forward. She told investigators that Shane had fallen 4 to 5 feet away from the door. It didn't look like he had been trying to force his way in at all. And then the police found the video. Tucker and Kelly had recorded the moments leading up to the shooting. The footage showed Shane pacing outside, but never coming close enough to violate the restraining order. Then, suddenly, Tucker's voice cut through. "He's coming into the house." She grabbed the gun. Kelly shouted, "She's not signing a grant deed. It's her property." And then, without much hesitation, Tucker fired. Shane could be heard yelling before he hit the ground. The video shattered their self-defense claim. It showed that Shane hadn't been trying to enter the home. He hadn't made any aggressive moves. The shooting wasn't reactionary. It was preemptive. Tucker was rearrested, this time for murder. When Tucker finally went to trial, she pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter. She was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison. According to an NBC documentary, she was released in November 2024. Thanks for listening to 10-Minute Murder, your brief and bingeable true crime podcast. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and if you've got a request for a story you'd like me to talk about here on this podcast, just like the one you heard today, you can email it to me, joe@10minutemurder.com. And also at 10minutemurder.com, you can find photos from all the stories you hear right here on the podcast. When you go to 10minutemurder.com, click on the murder blog, and it's going to pop up, give you the full story, what you just heard, plus all the photos, so you can get visuals to go along with it. If you're a brand new listener, hit subscribe right now so that you don't miss any future episodes of the podcast. Follow me on social media, and if you really dig the podcast, I appreciate it, first of all. But second, make sure you share it with your friends and family. It doesn't grow if it's just us kind of sitting here listening, which is fine. You know, I don't mind it being just us, kind of an intimate thing. But you can share the podcast with your friends and family, and that'll help the show grow even more than it already has, which I do appreciate. And I believe that's going to do it. That's your episode for today. Now, if you're off to binge more episodes of the podcast, don't let me stop you. But if you run out, if this is the last episode and you're like, oh, heck, what do I do now? You can go check out 10-Minute Mystery, my other podcast. There aren't very many murders over there, but it's just a bunch of weird things. Bigfoot, aliens, pyramids, ghosts. If you like all that stuff, this is a good podcast for you to check out in the meantime when you're not listening to 10-Minute Murder. It's called 10-Minute Mystery. Thanks. Have a good day.